I know we often ponder the question, is stubble worth the trouble? What is the optimum amount of stubble cover to reduce wind erosion and evaporation? Where and how does grazing play a part?
So Melly CMA is about conserving our environment and making sure that it's all looked after properly. So we started this project to say, well, apart from stubble cover, is there any other reason why we want to keep our stubble there so that we can increase our moisture conservation? So what we were trying to do with this project was that we were trying to determine whether there was a threshold or an optimal amount of stubble or a minimum requirement of stubble that would ensure that you increased your moisture conservation. So if you overgraze, are you going to be losing moisture as a result of that? So the way that we tested this was we did it on two sites. So we did it on a sandy site and a clay site just north of Birchip, between here and Berrowillick. So it's a randomised trial set up on a wheat stubble with about 4 tonnes to the hectare of stubble, so it was coming off a fairly decent crop. And what we did was we had 4 treatments. So we had ungrazed plots, a short amount of grazing to graze it down to 2 tonnes, and then down to 1 tonne, and then down to nil stubble. So we used lambs to set up these treatments. We had full weed control, so following on with that message that came out of the Water Use Efficiency Initiative. And what we did was we took soil cores at the start of the summer period and soil cores at the end so that we can take account of the moisture changes over that summer period. The bulk of the rainfall came in that late February, early March period. So essentially we have a situation where we can actually compare the effect of the stubble on moisture conservation because we had good rainfall over the summer, so it was giving us a good chance to compare how the different treatments were having an effect. So in the end, we had about 135 mils of summer rainfall. So what we did when we set it up a series of fenced-off plots. So you can see that we've got different amounts of stubble cover. So if we just go through, you can see that when we say it was nil stubble, we really meant it was nil stubble. So there was about 10 lambs or 20 lambs in that little plot for about a week, and they really hit it hard and cleaned it out well and truly. So then we can see that we've got 1 tonne to the hectare of stubble, which again, it was hit fairly hard, but there's still a little bit of standing stubble and a lot of stubble lying on its side there in the background. Then we've got 2 plots of 2 tonnes to the hectare of stubble, and then you can see the ungrazed out the back there. Okay, so when we move into the results, but before we could assess the differences between them, we need to just make sure that our starting conditions were actually what we said they were. So what we did was we used GCAT, which is a ground cover assessment tool, which is developed by Ben Jones, which helps us assess the percentage cover. So we did have some differences in starting cover. This is after the grazing. So the nil and 1 tonnes to the stubbles were the same at both the sand and clay site, and the 2 tonnes and 4 tonnes were the same. So we didn't quite get the level of differentiation between all 4 treatments that we would have liked, but there certainly was differences that we could compare in terms of our stored soil water. Okay, so how did that translate into stored soil water? So if we subtract the final soil water measurements from the initial ones, you can see that we've got the stored soil water column. So the nil treatment had 62 mils, 47 for the 1 tonne, 67 for 2 tonnes, and 59 for the 4 tonnes. So even though there are some visual differences there, the numbers that came out of that were not statistically different from each other. So in terms of the clay site, I also point out, so we had a fallow efficiency of 42% at that site. So the rule of thumb that we use, we expect a fallow efficiency of about 25% for a sand or 20% for a clay. So the fact that all that rain came in one big hit or one big rainfall event meant that we had an improved fallow efficiency. So if you're thinking about how much moisture you're conserving over the summer, the way the rainfall comes has a big impact on that. So it's certainly a good point to note when you're thinking about your upcoming season about how much moisture you've got. Have a look at the rainfall records and see how that rainfall came. So in terms of the clay site, similar sort of story. This time we had a little bit of a difference in anthesis biomass, but no difference in yield. And the fallow efficiency at the clay site was 42. Okay, so the commercial practice that came out of this is that crop stubble provides a valuable feed source, so it's a good chance to finish off lambs and hopefully get them off the farm nice and quickly and capture some good prices at the end of the summer period. In this trial, there was no moisture penalty from grazing stubbles or no effects on the subsequent crops. The other thing that we probably found was that in mallee environments, it's difficult for us to produce enough stubble to create those benefits through increased moisture conservation. So the rule still remains that we need to maintain a good amount of stubble cover to prevent the risk of wind erosion on our site. So it was, and work from the University of New England and New South Wales DPI shows that we should be aiming to have about 2 tonnes of stubble, or about 70% cover, to ensure that we don't have any negative effects associated with erosion. Essentially, we might be starting to see a few more of these guys out there in the paddock grazing our stubbles if we're not going to have negative effects associated with that in terms of our stored soil water.